She was supposed to be my roommate. Nothing more, nothing less. I still remember the day I carried my 2 heavy suitcases up the creaky wooden stairs of that old off-campus house. The place smelled faintly of dust and lavender air freshener, like someone tried too hard to cover up the years of students who lived there before us. I was nervous but also excited. College was supposed to be the start of everything new. I wanted freedom, a friend, someone to share late-night pizza with, someone who would understand the loneliness of being away from home. When I opened the door to our room for the first time, she was already there, sitting cross-legged on her bed with headphones in. She had this effortless coolness about her, like she belonged anywhere she went. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "You must be Anna." Her voice was calm, casual, almost like she was already in control of the space. I laughed awkwardly, introduced myself, and started unpacking, trying to make my side of the room feel like mine. I pinned up pictures of my family, taped a small poster of my favourite band, placed a cosy blanket from home on my bed. She didn't do any of that. Her side of the room was minimal, almost bare, except for a stack of sketchbooks and a jar of black pens. I thought it was mysterious. I thought she was artistic, maybe even deep. Looking back now, I should have seen it as a warning sign. A lack of roots, of stability. That first night, we sat on the floor with cheap plastic cups filled with soda and talked. She told me about her ex-boyfriend in high school, about how she hated small towns, about how she was ready to reinvent herself. I told her about my parents, my little brother, about how I wanted to study psychology because I was fascinated by how people worked. She laughed and said, "That's dangerous, knowing how people work." At the time, I thought it was just a joke. The first few weeks felt easy, almost like a sleepover that never ended. We went grocery shopping together, splitting the cost of cereal and milk. We stayed up late watching Netflix, falling asleep with the blue glow of the laptop still shining in the room. She borrowed my sweaters, and I let her, because that's what friends do. She made me coffee in the mornings when I overslept, and I thought it was sweet. I trusted her quickly, maybe too quickly, but trust felt natural back then. I wanted to believe that living together would make us closer, that we'd become like sisters. There was one night, maybe 3 weeks in, when it started to shift. I came back from class to find her sitting at my desk, using my laptop. She didn't even look guilty. She just smiled and said, "I needed to Google something." I brushed it off, telling myself it wasn't a big deal, but inside I felt that small sting. That tiny alarm bell I chose to ignore. She started doing it more often, touching my things, moving them around, as if boundaries didn't exist. But every time I tried to bring it up, she would laugh, hug me, or distract me with stories about her life. I thought maybe I was overreacting. I wanted peace more than I wanted to confront her. That was my first mistake. Because once she realised I wouldn't stop her, she kept going further, and what started as a simple shared living space slowly turned into something darker, something I couldn't control. At first, it was little things. She would borrow my shampoo and forget to put it back, or she'd wear my jacket without asking and spill something on it, pretending she didn't notice. I told myself that's what roommates do. They share, they mix lives a little. But the truth is, she never gave anything back. She didn't offer me her stuff. She didn't apologise. She acted like everything in that room was hers by default. I wanted to say something, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck. I was raised to be polite, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. And she was so charming when she wanted to be. She had this way of making me feel silly, like I was too uptight. "Relax, Anna," she'd say, rolling her eyes when I mentioned that she had my favourite hoodie again. "We're basically sisters now." And I wanted that closeness, I really did. So I laughed it off and told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter, because soon it wasn't just clothes or shampoo. It was my time, my energy, even my privacy. She started inviting people over without asking. Loud groups of strangers who sat on my bed, touched my books, and left their drinks on my desk. I hated it, but she always framed it like I was the boring one. "You need to live a little," she'd say, turning up the music. The walls shook, the floor vibrated, and I would lie in my bed with my headphones on, pretending not to care while inside I felt trapped in my own room. There was one Friday night I'll never forget. I came back from the library, exhausted after studying for a big exam, and the room was packed with people I didn't know. My desk was covered with half-empty cups. My blanket smelled like beer, and she was sitting on my chair like it was hers. When she saw me, she just raised her glass and said, "Welcome home." Everyone laughed. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed it down, smiled weakly, and locked myself in the bathroom until the noise finally faded. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something important. This wasn't just her being careless. This was her testing me, seeing how far she could go before I broke. And I never broke, not then. I thought if I stayed calm, if I waited, she would grow out of it. But she didn't. She only got bolder. She started using my laptop when I wasn't around, leaving tabs open with my email, my social media, even my bank account. When I confronted her once, she just smirked and said, "You should be more careful with your passwords." She said it like a joke, but I knew she meant it. That was the moment I should have drawn a line, packed my bags, and left. But I stayed because I thought I could handle it. Thought I could manage her. I didn't realise that by staying quiet, I was giving her permission to keep crossing boundaries. And she would, again and again, until I barely recognised myself in the mirror. The thing about living with someone like her is that the change is so gradual you almost don't notice it happening. At first, it was just irritation, like a small pebble in my shoe that I kept ignoring. But over time, the pebble became heavier, sharper, until every step hurt. She had this way of taking over spaces that didn't belong to her. My desk slowly turned into her vanity table. My bed became a hangout spot for her friends. Even the fridge had more of her food and drinks than mine, though she never paid her share. I'd open the door and find my yogurt gone, my leftovers eaten, and she would shrug like it wasn't a big deal. "You don't mind, right?" she'd say, already licking the spoon. And I'd smile tightly, my stomach twisting, telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. But inside, I was boiling. I remember one morning when I woke up late for class. I rushed to get ready, only to find she had used up all my shampoo and left the bottle empty in the shower. I stood there, water running down my face, too angry to cry. Later that day, she borrowed my favourite jacket for a party. I told her no, I needed it. But when I came back that evening, it was gone from my closet. She wore it anyway, spilled something sticky down the sleeve, and left it crumpled on the floor. "Relax," she said when I confronted her. "It's just a jacket." But it wasn't just a jacket. It was mine. And I was starting to feel like nothing was mine anymore. What scared me most wasn't her carelessness. It was how she seemed to enjoy my discomfort. If I looked upset, she'd smirk, almost as if she was collecting my reactions. Once, when she caught me looking at the mess on my desk after her friends left, she whispered, "You really should learn to share, Anna." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were cold. I started spending more time at the library, staying until it closed, just to avoid going back to the room. But even then, she managed to seep into my life. I'd return to find my books moved, my notes shuffled, little things out of place that made me feel like I was being watched. And when I asked her about it, she'd laugh and say, "You're so paranoid." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. but deep down I knew I wasn't. The room that was supposed to be my safe space had turned into a battlefield, and I was losing. Every day I gave up a little more ground, and she knew it. I could see it in the way she walked, the way she talked, as if she owned me as much as she owned the room. There was one night that still burns in my memory. The night I realised this wasn't just about sharing space, it was about control. I came back from a late shift at my part-time job, exhausted and smelling like coffee grounds, dreaming only of sleep. When I pushed open the door, I froze. She was sitting on my bed, my blanket wrapped around her shoulders, typing on my laptop. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my voice cracked. She looked up with the most casual expression, like I was the one interrupting her. "Relax, I just needed to send an email," she said, fingers still moving over my keyboard. I walked closer and saw my inbox open. Messages from my mom and my brother scrolled through. My chest tightened. "That's my private stuff," I said, reaching for the laptop. She pulled it closer, smirking. "Don't be so dramatic. We live together. What's yours is basically mine." She laughed like it was a joke, but the way she stared at me made my skin crawl. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling violated in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just my laptop, it was my life, my conversations, my safe little corner of the world. She had reached in and taken that too. After that, I started hiding things. I kept my wallet under my pillow, set new passwords on everything, even locked my journal in a drawer. But somehow, she always found ways to break through. I would come back and notice the drawer slightly open, or the journal on a different page. She wanted me to know she had been there. It was a game to her, one I never agreed to play. The more she pushed, the smaller I felt. My friends noticed too. When they came over, she inserted herself into every conversation, cutting me off, making little comments that stung but sounded harmless to outsiders. "Anna's a little obsessive," she'd say, laughing, and my friends would laugh too, not realising how those words dug into me. Slowly they started drifting away, making excuses not to come by, and I let it happen, too tired to fight for them. She isolated me without ever raising her voice, without ever saying I couldn't do something. Instead, she made me doubt myself, doubt my worth, until I started believing maybe she was right. Maybe I was too uptight, too sensitive, too boring. But deep down I knew the truth. She wasn't just careless or messy, she was deliberate. She wanted power over me, and I was giving it to her. Every day I stayed silent. It was around midterms when everything started to feel unbearable. The stress of exams was already heavy, but living with her made it almost impossible to focus. I'd sit at my desk trying to review notes, and she would blast music or invite friends over, filling the room with laughter and chatter that scraped against my nerves. I asked her politely one evening, "Could you please keep it down? I have an exam tomorrow." She tilted her head, her smile sharp. "You're always studying, Anna. Maybe that's why you're so uptight. Live a little." Then she turned the volume up louder. I ended up dragging my books to the library again, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights until my eyes burned. When I got back past midnight, the room was dark and quiet, but I could smell alcohol lingering in the air. My bed was messy, the blanket thrown to the side, crumbs on the sheets. She had been sitting there again, maybe with her friends, maybe alone. I couldn't tell. I stood frozen in the doorway, my throat tight. That was my space, my little island in the chaos, and she had trampled through it like it was nothing. The next morning I tried to talk to her seriously. I told her we needed boundaries, that I felt uncomfortable with her using my stuff. She listened for a moment, then laughed softly and said, "You're so dramatic. Honestly, it's kind of cute how much you care about little things." She brushed past me, her perfume strong and suffocating, and I felt smaller than ever. It wasn't just that she didn't respect me. It was that she enjoyed showing me how little I mattered. I started writing about it in my journal, pouring out every detail, every frustration, because I had no one else to tell. I couldn't call my parents. They would just worry and tell me to move out, but I didn't have the money. I felt trapped, cornered in a life I hadn't chosen. One night, while I was out late, she must have read that journal. I came back to find it lying open on my bed. The pages bent, her handwriting scrawled in the margins next to my words. Things like pathetic and crybaby, written in black ink, right next to my private thoughts. I felt like my chest was caving in. She looked at me from across the room and smiled sweetly. "You should be more careful with your secret," she said. My hands shook as I picked it up, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. That was the moment I realised she wasn't just careless. She was cruel, and worse, she was enjoying every second of breaking me down. After she defaced my journal, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was scared. Scared of how far she was willing to go, scared of how much of myself I had already lost. I started moving differently in that room, quieter, like a guest in my own space. I hid my laptop under my mattress, locked my phone with a passcode, even carried my wallet everywhere, even just to the shower. But no matter how careful I was, she always found cracks to slip through. Once I came back to find my backpack unzipped, my notebook shuffled around. Another time, my jewellery box was moved slightly, a necklace tangled that I knew I hadn't touched. Each little thing felt like her way of reminding me that she could reach me anywhere, that nothing I owned was safe. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but I wasn't. She made sure I noticed. That was the worst part. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to feel helpless. My grades started slipping because I couldn't concentrate. I'd sit in class, my mind wandering back to the room, wondering what she was touching, what she was reading, who she was talking about me to. Because by then, she had also started spreading things. Little lies at first, telling people I was moody, that I cried a lot. Then bigger ones, like that I was obsessed with her, that I was jealous of her. I heard it from classmates in whispers, saw it in the way people looked at me differently. She was shaping the narrative, and I was losing control of my own story. One night I tried to confront her seriously. I told her I knew she was reading my things, that I felt violated and disrespected. She sat on her bed, legs crossed, calmly painting her nails. When I finished, she looked up and said, "You really should loosen up, Anna. If you didn't have secrets, you wouldn't care so much." Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there shaking, every muscle in my body screaming to yell, to fight. But the silence between us grew heavier until I broke and walked out. I wandered the campus for hours, the cold biting my skin, wondering how I had let it get this bad. And then came the breaking point. One morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my desk in her handwriting. It said, "I know more about you than you think." Nothing else, just that. My stomach dropped, my hands went numb. It wasn't just a roommate issue anymore, it was psychological warfare. She was digging under my skin, rewriting who I was, and I didn't know how to stop her. That day, I realised she wasn't just my worst roommate, she was becoming my biggest mistake, the kind that changes you forever. After the note, sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding at every small sound, convinced she was watching me, even when she pretended to sleep. I started locking the bathroom door, even when I showered, afraid she might walk in and take something else that was mine. My body was constantly tense, my chest tight, my stomach in knots. I remember walking across campus one afternoon, sunlight warm on my face, and realizing I couldn't even enjoy it because my mind was stuck in that room, wondering what game she was playing next. I considered moving out, but money was always the problem. Rent was cheap compared to other places, and my parents couldn't afford to help more. I felt trapped, like a bird with clipped wings forced to share its cage with a snake. My friends had stopped visiting altogether by then. Some of them looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, as if they weren't sure who to believe. She was clever about it. She never said anything outright cruel in public. Instead, she'd drop little hints, planting seeds of doubt. "Anna gets stressed so easily," she'd say with a light laugh, and people would nod like it was true. I felt myself shrinking in their eyes. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, laughing softly. She was talking about me. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard pathetic, clingy, and my name followed by another laugh. I sat frozen on my bed, tears burning my eyes, but she just kept talking like I didn't exist. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I stayed silent, paralyzed by my own fear. That silence was what she fed on. The more I kept quiet, the more power she had. And she knew it. The turning point came one Saturday when I returned from a study session. The room was empty, but something felt wrong. My drawer, the one I kept my journal in, now locked with a cheap padlock, was wide open, the lock broken. My journal was gone. Panic surged through me. I tore the room apart, checked every corner, every bag, but it wasn't there. Hours later, she walked in, holding it casually in her hand. She tossed it onto my bed like it was nothing and said, "You really shouldn't write down things you don't want people to know." I froze, my throat dry, my mind racing with what she might have read, what she might already be telling others. I grabbed the journal, hugging it to my chest like it could shield me, but the damage was done. She smirked, brushed her hair behind her ear, and left the room without another word. That night, something inside me cracked. I realized she wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to change. And if I didn't do something, she would ruin me completely. After she stole my journal and threw it back like it was some kind of joke, I couldn't shake the feeling that every part of me was exposed. I found myself walking through campus, imagining people whispering about words I had written in private. My deepest thoughts scattered like ashes in the wind. The paranoia grew so strong that I started avoiding eye contact, keeping my head down and even skipping classes just so I wouldn't have to face anyone. It was exactly what she wanted. Me, isolated, small, powerless. But the strangest part was how normal she acted in front of others. To everyone else, she was the cool, laid-back roommate, the one who always had a smile and a story. People liked her. Professors remembered her name. She blended charm with just enough mystery to seem interesting. And behind that mask, I was the only one who knew how twisted she could be. The loneliness ate at me. Nights were the worst. I would hear her breathing in the dark, steady and calm, while my heart raced under the covers. Sometimes she would hum softly to herself, little melodies that made my skin crawl because they always came after she had done something cruel. It was like she was celebrating quietly. One night I caught her staring at me at the reflection of the window. I don't know how long she had been watching, but when our eyes met, she smiled slowly, deliberately, like she knew I was too scared to say anything. I started planning little escapes, sleeping in the library, staying over with classmates I barely knew. Anything to avoid that room, but no matter where I went, I always had to come back. Rent tied me there, my lack of options chained me to her. I even thought about asking for help from the housing office, but I was terrified she'd find out and make things worse. She had already proven she could dig under my skin with just a few words or a note. What would she do if I openly went against her? The idea of retaliation kept me frozen, The breaking point came during finals week. I came back from the library one night, exhausted, and found my bed soaked. She had poured water all over it. She was lying on her own bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing happened. My books were stacked neatly on my desk, but the pages were damp, curling at the edges. I stood there trembling, my throat dry. "Why would you do this?" I whispered. She didn't even look up. "Accidents happen," she said casually, her lips curving into the faintest smile. I wanted to scream, to throw the books at her, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was sit on the edge of the wet mattress, feeling my body shake with anger and helplessness. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with my back against the wall, watching her breathe peacefully in her bed, while every cell in my body burned with the realization that I couldn't survive like this much longer. Something had to change, and if no one was going to save me, I would have to find a way to save myself. After the night she ruined my bed, I felt something inside me harden. The fear was still there, but it began to turn into anger, slow and steady, like embers under ash waiting to catch fire. I realised she wasn't going to stop until I either left or broke completely, and I couldn't leave. I didn't have the money, I didn't have the support, and I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me run away. So I started paying attention in a different way. Instead of shrinking, I began to observe her the way you'd watch a storm, trying to predict the next strike. I noticed how she always left her sketchbooks scattered on her desk, how she used the same password for her phone, how she obsessed over what people thought of her. It struck me then, she thrived on power, but her power only worked if I stayed silent. If I let her take my voice, she won. So I began writing again, but not in the journal she could find. I wrote in scraps of paper I hid in my textbooks, notes disguised as study outlines. I poured out my anger, my suspicions, my plans. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a weapon, even if it was only words. At the same time, I started talking to people again. Carefully, cautiously, I tested the waters with old friends, hinting at some of the things she had done. Most of them didn't believe me at first. Her charm ran too deep. But one or two gave me a look I recognised, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. It was enough to keep me going. The real shift came when she slipped up. One night, I pretended to be asleep while she rummaged through my backpack. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed, but inside I was burning with rage. She took out one of my notebooks, flipped through it, and whispered to herself, "Pathetic." That was when I knew. I couldn't wait for her to destroy me. I had to hit back. The next day, I watched her leave her phone unattended on her bed while she went to shower. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't need to guess the password. I had already seen it. When the screen unlocked, I felt a rush of power, unlike anything I had felt before. Messages, photos, conversations, all the things she had hidden from the world were suddenly in front of me. And I realised she wasn't invincible. She had secrets too. That night, as she slept soundly just a few feet away, I lay awake holding on to one thought. Maybe she had underestimated me. Maybe she thought I was too weak, too scared, too small. But she was wrong, and sooner or later I was going to prove it. Once I realised she wasn't untouchable, everything changed. I no longer looked at her like some unstoppable force, but like a puzzle I could finally solve. Her phone was full of things she wouldn't want anyone else to see. Half-finished texts to boys she pretended not to care about, angry rants about professors, even nasty comments about the very friends she always tried to charm. She built her image on being effortless and likeable, but her private words revealed someone insecure, petty and cruel. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous, I didn't use anything right away. I knew if I confronted her too soon, she'd find a way to twist it back on me. Instead, I started keeping track. I copied screenshots, stored them on a hidden drive, even printed a few and tucked them into my textbooks where she would never look. Every time she crossed a line with me, I'd remind myself quietly, "You're not the only one who can play games." She must have sensed something shifting, because her behaviour changed too. She still invaded my space, but she began testing me with smaller cruelties, like leaving crumbs in my bed or borrowing things without admitting it. Maybe she thought I'd snap. Maybe she wanted to see me break again. But I didn't. I kept my expression calm, my voice steady, and that calmness unnerved her. I could see it in her eyes sometimes, the flicker of suspicion when she looked at me across the room. She didn't know what I knew, and that uncertainty made her restless. Finals ended, and winter break was coming. Most students packed their bags to go home, but I couldn't afford the trip. Neither could she. That meant we were stuck together in that suffocating room for weeks. No classes, no distractions. Just silence and tension pressing in like walls, closing tighter each day. The first night of break, she tried her old games again. She left a note on my desk that said, "I wonder what your parents would think if they knew everything." I read it without reacting, tucked it into my drawer, and looked her straight in the eye. "Maybe you should wonder what your friends would think if they knew everything," I said softly. For the first time, she didn't smile. Her lips tightened, and she turned away without a word. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt a surge of victory. I had finally pushed back. That winter break became a quiet war. She stopped touching my things as openly, stopped mocking me out loud, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for a slip. And I kept waiting too, holding on to the evidence I had, knowing the moment would come when I'd finally use it, because I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. The tension during winter break was unbearable, but it also gave me clarity. Without the noise of classes or friends, it was just her and me in that tiny room. Two people circling each other like predators. I began noticing things I had missed before. The way she always had to know what I was doing. The way she inserted herself into my routines. If I made tea, she'd suddenly want tea. If I went out for a walk, she'd ask where I was going. It wasn't about companionship, it was about control. One night, while she was in the shower, I sat at her desk, pretending to study, but really watching her phone light up with notifications. Curiosity got the better of me. And when she came out wrapped in a towel, I asked casually, "Who keeps texting you this late?" She froze for just a second before laughing it off, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. That was when I knew I had leverage. The messages were from a guy she had sworn she wasn't seeing, a guy who already had a girlfriend. It was messy, and she knew it. Over the next few days, I let little hints slip, carefully timed, like mentioning his name when she hadn't told me anything about him. Each time, her face paled just slightly. She was rattled. For once, she wasn't the one pulling the strings. I was. The shift in power was intoxicating, but also dangerous. I could feel her testing me, searching for cracks. She started acting overly sweet, offering me coffee in the mornings, asking if I wanted to watch a movie. But her eyes told a different story, sharp and watchful. I played along, sipping the coffee, smiling at the movie, while inside I was steel. I had survived months of her cruelty, and I wasn't going to crumble now. The real breaking moment came one evening when she tried to pick another fight. She accused me of gossiping about her, of trying to turn people against her. I sat on my bed, calm, and said, "Funny you'd say that, considering what you write about your own friends." Her face drained of colour. She knew then that I had seen her messages, that her carefully crafted image wasn't safe anymore. She hissed, "What did you do?" And for the first time, I smiled. Nothing yet. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable, but I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that the girl she had spent months breaking was no longer afraid. From that night on, she kept her distance. She still tried to intimidate me with looks or sarcastic comments, but the balance had shifted. She knew I had power over her, and that uncertainty kept her from going further. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't free yet, but I wasn't trapped either. I was standing on equal ground, ready for whatever final move had to come. The last weeks we lived together felt like the calm before a storm. She didn't dare cross me openly anymore, and I didn't let down my guard for a second. We spoke less, just surface-level words about groceries or class schedules. But every glance carried a history of unspoken battles. I knew it couldn't last forever. One of us had to make the final move, and deep down, I wanted it to be me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I overheard her laughing on the phone, her voice low but sharp. She was talking about me again, weaving another story about how unstable I was, how she put up with me like a charity case. I felt the familiar burn of rage in my chest, but this time, instead of shrinking, I acted. That night, I printed out several screenshots from her phone. The ones where she mocked her friends, where she flirted with the guy who already had a girlfriend, where she admitted she hated nearly everyone she smiled at in public. I didn't need to spread them widely. I just needed her to know I could. I left one page on her pillow, folded neatly, and went to the library. When I came back, she was sitting on her bed, pale and furious, the paper crushed in her fist. "You're playing a dangerous game," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. I looked straight at her and said, "So are you, and I'm done losing." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She turned away, silent. The power she once held over me had cracked, and she knew it. After that, things were different. She stopped snooping, stopped mocking, stopped touching my things. The room felt tense but strangely peaceful, like a battlefield after the war when both sides are too tired to keep fighting. When the semester ended, I packed my bags and walked out of that house for the last time without looking back. I never spoke to her again, though sometimes I still see her face in my nightmares. That smirk she wore when she thought she owned me. People often ask me what the worst mistake of my life was, and I think about her. Not because I chose her as a roommate, I couldn't have known then, but because I let her strip away so much of me before I finally stood up. I let her steal my peace, my friendships, my sense of safety. But in a strange way, she also taught me something I carry even now. Silence is surrender. The moment you stop fighting for yourself, someone else will take everything. I wish I had learned that sooner, but at least I learned it at all. She was my roommate, yes, but she was also my worst mistake, and I'll never make that mistake again.